Welcome to the Felt Dyslexic Artist Interview. My name is Liz Buckridge. For me, as a dyslexic artist, other artists and creatives have always been my number one inspiration. In these interviews, we talk with artists and creatives who share their stories and gain insight into their process from inspiration to art tips, career building, and more. We're so lucky to listen to the wisdom of Nadine Flowers, right?
Right,
Nadine.
you got it.
I'm so excited to hear about her future projects and share insights on life as an artist. Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for talking with us today.
Well, thank you for doing this. This is pretty exciting. It's a little nerving as well. I've never done it before, so let's do the hard things, right?
Yeah, I can't wait to hear your story. So I'm going to jump right in. Describe the art you make. What medium do you primarily work in, and why do you choose that medium?
So the art that I primarily make is what I would call collages or assemblages, and they sort of fall into the category of mixed media. But essentially, I work with found objects from beach combing and beach wandering, and I collect anything and everything that I find. So when I'm out there collecting things, because I usually have like backpacks and bags with me, people are like, "What are you collecting?" And I'm like, "Anything I can get my hands on," you know. So natural objects, but also man-made objects, and sometimes the more unusual and strange the object is, the more I'm interested by it. So it could be glass, stones, pottery shards, bones, driftwood, decayed fishing reels and fishing lures. I found a pair of dentures last winter, which did not make it into my art, but like I still pick them up because I just think it's weird. I found, cell phones, and I just have this place downstairs in my studio where anything that I don't use, but it's extremely weird, I just sort of make this weird collection of things that are going on. So, yeah.
Do you work in any other mediums?
No, this is primarily my thing right now, and I'm really new to this. So, I'm a graphic designer by training, and that is my sort of full-time day job. So a lot of what I do is leveraged from that. But this collage approach is sort of my first endeavor into art.
It's very cool.
Thank you.
How did you get into making art? Can you tell us about your background and how you first became interested in it?
Sure, sure. So, even growing up as a kid, as a small child, like art was my thing, My sister would always sort of tease me that, she'd start to do a project and 5 minutes later, she was sort of distracted and off and doing something else, and she wouldn't finish what she was working on. But, I was this sort of diligent, meticulous, could sit there all day and draw or paint or craft something. So it's sort of always been, what I gravitated towards. And, I was inspired and encouraged my mom and my grandmother. My grandma was very artistic, sort of more in a artisan crafty kind of way. My mom did some painting and drawing when she was younger. So it was always sort of part of what we did and what we did to pass time, growing up as a kid. So.
That's cool. How did you get into your specific style? What themes, or well, I guess you answered what themes or subjects inspire your work because you're beachcombing, but how did you get into that style?
So I've always been a collector. So I find something that interests me, and it could be an antique object, and I find just one of them somewhere. And then, over time, I find that I continually look for that object. So it could be like the calipers that you might have seen when you came in the door. I've got a collection of metal calipers on the wall, and I found one which I thought was intriguing. And then the next thing I want to do is start a collection of these similar things. So I have a lot of collections, and that's probably what happened for me in terms of the beachcombing process. And it started out when I was really young, like a kid, collecting. And I think many, many people go to the beach and they collect shells and rocks and sea glass and things like that. And they put them in jars, they put them in a basket, they end up in the basement. And that was definitely me. I mean, I have amassed a collection, 30, 40, 50 years worth of stuff. Every time, you come back from the beach, you sort of unload your pockets. And I don't know, a couple of years ago, my daughter was getting ready to go off to school, and I was taking some art classes. I took a printmaking class over in Jamestown. I took a jewelry class down at the Cave, and I've done some like really longer form jewelry classes at the museum school in Boston. But I just decided like I need to sort of figure out what I'm going to do with my extra time, if you will, when she's not here in the house anymore as an only child. And so I decided to do something with my amassed collection of materials, you know. And as a result of that, you start to sort of need to collect more, right? Because you don't want to run out, you know. So it's like a multi-tiered process where I get to beachcomb, which I love, right? I'm outside in nature, walking around, you know, seeing beautiful scenery, finding interesting things. It's quiet, it's peaceful. I usually go when there's not a lot of people around. Then you sort of come back to the studio and you've got these bags of treasures. And I'm a sort of A-type personality, very organized and methodical. So then I get to sort of wash and clean everything, and I sort it by shape and size and color and type of material. And then, you know, I sort of get to make things with it. So it's got a lot of different levels that are, to me, you know, very fulfilling.
Do you consider yourself neurodivergent or neurotypical?
I would say I am neurotypical. I think that I process things in a lot of the ways that are sort of normal and expected. You know, I was always a really good student in school and things like that. And also, I think as a graphic designer, my type of design is very clean and meticulous. I know there are a lot of creative people who have amazing thought processes, but have difficulty sort of structuring things and getting them down, particularly in an environment where you're doing like graphic design, marketing materials for customers and clients, right? It's not about you, really. It's about their business and what they need the materials to say and do and communicate their story. So there's a lot of guardrails in that environment, which forced me to be really methodical and clinical, and everything had to be sort of just so, right? And you're going to print an annual report, and if there's a mistake in it, like that's a really bad thing, right? So I think my brain processes things in a really sort of linear way in some ways. But what I like about this sort of artistic endeavor is it allows me to look at things differently, right? But I still bring so many of the skill set that I learned in my traditional sort of formal graphic design process, right? In terms of scale and size and shape and color and composition and movement and pattern, like all of those things translate in just a very natural way. So I was really excited when I first started doing this because it sort of came naturally, I guess, you know. So that's interesting.
I really like your pieces with the tiny shells that are all.
Oh, the grid. Yeah, right. So that's a much more sort of structured and linear approach. And one of the things that I've been sort of trying to explore is trying to do sort of different abstractions using the same materials, right? So some are very gridded and structured, some are radial, some of the designs are linear, some of them are much more organic. But I've been trying to branch out and figure out like using materials that I've been sort of avoiding. Like that particular shell, I don't know what to do with it yet. But now I'm pushing myself to try to work with that shell and figure out what kind of a composition I can make and what that piece will look like. So it's easy to sort of gravitate towards the things that are familiar. So yeah, it's just fun to explore new ways to do things.
So cool. Have you faced any challenges or setbacks in your art career, and how did you overcome them?
That's an interesting question, because like I consider my art career really being, 30 years of graphic design. And then only more recently in the last couple of years has it been, more in the sort of fine art. But I do think that one of the challenges that I have in the fine art arena is trying to, I don't know, put a label on what it is that I do. because some people might say it's not fine art. You know, some people think that photography, for instance, is not necessarily fine art because it's a photograph and you can make 2,000 copies of a photograph. Versus a painting, which is a one of a kind, you can never really reproduce it again in its original form. I think with the sort of collage and assemblage work that I do, it can tend to be more artisan and more craft-like. But also it is one of a kind. And but it's just different. So I sometimes don't know where to place it in terms of what it is that I do. You know, do I belong at an artisan fair? Do I belong at a fine art show? Do I belong in a gallery, at a museum? Like it's different, you know. So I don't know, I'm just working through that now.
I think it's all the above.
I
Where did you grow up?
grew up very fortunately here in Little Compton, Rhode Island. So I mean, when I was first born, we were over on the island in Middletown. But then when I came here, I was, I think, 7 or 8 years old. And so I've lived my whole, most of my childhood life here in Little Compton, a big part of the college years. And then, you know, I moved up towards Boston for my career. It was kind of hard to get a design job here, you know, living here. Although Providence was my first design job. So I was up in Boston and surrounding areas for a dozen years or so, and then came back home. Yeah, so I'm in love with the shoreline, of course, right? You need to be close to the water, and the solitude and the quietness and the beauty of the nature that surrounds me. And I feel like I'm very fortunate to live in this environment, you know. I'm not a city girl.
Well, we're in the woods.
We're in the woods. We are in the woods.
By
Yeah.
the beach.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you do art when you were a little kid? You started to talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like one of the memories that I remember the most was I was sleeping over my grandmother's house. I'm not sure if we lived in Middletown still then or not. It might have been when I went back to visit her, but she was in Middletown. And you know, being up really early in the morning with my watercolor pad, you know, sitting outside on her sidewalk, painting the morning glories because that was when they opened, like early in the morning, and just being really content to sit there for hours at a time. And, you know, she was always so encouraging. That's probably why the memory stuck. But I distinctly remember that. And one of the other stories that I like to tell is that growing up as a kid, I think, you know, today's kids are, what they do with their spare time is really, really different than what we did when we were kids, or at least what I did when I was a kid. And you know, we didn't have all the technology, and we didn't travel for summer vacations when I was little. So when I would get bored, I sort of joke about it. But my mom used to say, "Well, go out and paint some rocks on the porch. You know, like go find some rocks. Here's your paints. Go paint some rocks." And I did. You know, I loved it. That's what I would do. And even now, when we go to Cuttyhunk, which I know you're familiar with the island, I have my daughter and my two nieces, and we will go collect rocks and paint rocks. We paint shells. We do that kind of stuff because it's, you know, it sort of makes you slow down and just relax and enjoy the company and enjoy the outdoors. So I've always been, you know, artistic and crafty and always making something, you know, whether it's painting Easter eggs or making wooden cutting boards for my family when I was a kid for Christmas presents, or, you know, doing whatever. Yeah, I was always crafting something. Yeah.
We see those painted rocks. Do you leave them and
Oh
cut
yeah.
them?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we walk by them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good thing. I probably have some in the basement downstairs that I brought home that my daughter made. I'm like, I can't part with this. I need to keep this. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite colorway for your art? And is the colorway or palette for your art the same or different as the colors in your house?
So I would sort of call my colorway of my artwork as like earthy, right? So I'm picking up on a lot of the colors that I'm finding in nature and a lot of the objects that I'm working with. So I think like you instinctively think that the beach is blue because of the water and the sky. It's tan because of the sand, and that is absolutely true. And then oftentimes it's surrounded by greens, grasses, and things of that nature. But what I have found is that the closer you look at the little individual pieces of objects that you find, the more varied the color is. I was actually really surprised, even myself, after all these years, realizing how much purple there is and pink there is at the beach here in New England, right? I understand Florida, right? The tropical areas have a lot more pinks and purples in their shells. But here particularly, there's just a lot of it. So I tend to use that sort of core palette. I think I probably work with about 8 or 9 core colors for my painted hardboard. And sometimes I, tweak them a little bit. I want it to be a little bit more green, want it to be a little bit more blue. I want the purple to be a little bit duller or a little bit brighter. But I have a core color palette that I work with. And I would say that a lot of what I do is inspired by, my environment, what surrounds me, but then that also directly translates to how I have sort of decorated the house that I live in. There's nothing that's significantly too bright or too bold. And even when it comes to like the colors that I wear, like I don't think I own anything red, it's just not my color. I would never like work with red in my art because you don't really find it in the surroundings. So lots of greens, lots of blues, lots of whites and beiges and natural colors. And I just find them very soothing. Even the old vintage pottery that I collect, it's all that sort of same color palette that I really gravitate towards. But green is my color. Yeah, it always has been.
I love that. Describe the space where you make your art.
The space where I make my art, again, I've only been doing this for less than a couple of years, so it's a bit cobbled together. It started out actually as going to be like a jewelry workshop, because after I had finished the jewelry class down the Cape, I thought, I'm going to do something with this. I'm going to get a few tools and I'm going to make some jewelry out of stones and found objects and beach glass. And then as I first started that process, I realized I don't really know how to make jewelry. Like it's a lot more technical, I guess, than maybe picking up a paintbrush or working with found objects, right? So not to say that I haven't learned a lot in the last 2 years in terms of process, but I quickly decided that jewelry wasn't the thing I could dive right into because I just didn't have the equipment and the knowledge. But then I decided to still work with my amassed collection of objects. So the studio, it's sort of started out literally just as like a sink, a cabinet, and a bench. And it is now exploding at the seams, more and more bins and buckets and containers of objects. As I'm producing more art pieces, I need places to keep those before a show, or just so that they don't get damaged, because they're fragile but durable, right? So all of these objects are from nature, right? They've survived for however long on the beaches, but then once you sort of start to assemble them and work together with them, most of the pieces that I have don't have glass on top of them. So when I have to store them, or you just have to protect them. But my space is like slowly taking over much of, the downstairs of my house. And I think it would be lovely to have a beautiful studio in another building. I miss the daylight, right? There's not a lot of daylight down there. But it's nice and cool in the summer. And it's got its pros and cons working close to home here.
How did your school system support your interest in art growing up?
School system. So it's kind of interesting. Like my high school experience, I had a great art teacher. Like I think we all do, like artists, a lot of artists have great art teachers, right? They were inspirational. And the art class that I was in high school, she allowed us to sort of kind of do what we wanted to do. So, there was one girl who liked to do things with fabric, so she was hand making clothing and dyeing her white muslin with tea to make it look vintage. And, other people where there was one kid who was definitely going to be an architect. Like you could just tell that he was going to do that. And she just allowed him to do that. I didn't know specifically what I was interested in. So I did some painting and some drawing, but a lot of, looking back now, I realized that a lot of my work was very graphic, right? It wasn't, I always sort of say like, I could have been like a B plus fine artist, but that was never going to, like, painting and drawing. I was never going to like make a living out of being a fine artist. But here I am. But graphic design was where I ended up in college. But I didn't even know there was a thing such as graphic design, right? So I think a lot of our a lot of the guidance counselors when I was growing up, they just didn't do a lot of counseling or guidance, right? So I didn't go to college right after high school. I waited about 6 months, I think, or maybe a year. And I went to live in Connecticut with my aunt, who was an interior designer. So I was sort of interning with her, and quickly decided that that was not my thing. Although again, now looking back, like, I don't know why I didn't like it, because I feel like I would love that now. But I realized I needed to go back to school. So I started college kind of mid-year, and ended up like just in the foundational arts program at UMass Dartmouth. At the time it was SMU. And 2D drawing, 3D sculpture, printmaking, illustration, like just a dabbling in all of the different facets of art and what you could do. And then somehow, and photography, of course, and then sort of landed on graphic design, and I sort of think it's interesting that so many people today go to school for a particular career, and 5 years, 10 years, 15 years later, they're doing something entirely different, or they've changed careers 3 times since then. And like, I'm still doing it, which is crazy. I think, it doesn't happen to many people. So I don't know whether that's good or bad, but
It's very good.
that's where I landed.
How do you see your work evolving or changing in the future? What do you have planned?
I think about that a lot. And I do think that at some point, kind of sort of biding my time, like I would love to do much larger pieces. I have some things that I've collected that I already know, like the wheels are turning, like what I could possibly do with these pieces. But it needs to be large. And so I either need to like muster up the courage to do something really big, but I also think that there's a really strong opportunity to go sculptural as well, right? So many of these found objects could be integrated into something sculptural. And my husband is a welding and metal fab person, so he has a lot of that sort of structural knowledge and background. So like there might be an opportunity to do some collaboration that way, or just have him teach me some other techniques for joining and fabricating, but all again natural objects, so we'll see.
That is very cool. Is making art an emotional process or a strategic process for you?
I guess I would say it's probably a little bit of both, because I think you have to start with a size, right? So that's a decision. Although some of the pieces that I make, like the piece that's behind me, didn't actually start with a size. It started with just some of these individual objects and joining them together with wire and sinew and making these sort of vertical pieces. And I let the design of the piece decide where it was going to end and at what width it was going to be and what height it was going to be. But other times, like I'm working on a 16 by 16 board, right? So that's a strategy, a choice. And then from there, the process sometimes flips back and forth, because I could start by thinking I'm going to do a radial design and I'm going to try to work with, whites, creams, purples, and browns. And I start on something and it ends up being nothing at all like what I thought I was going to start with. The size remains the same, but it ends up being organic and blues and greens instead, because just whatever objects I happen to pick up like just weren't working for me at the time. So in that respect, I just sort of let the process go where it needs to go. So it's probably a little bit of both, you know.
Seems like there's a lot of flow in
Yeah,
your work.
there is, and some people have asked me like, do you work on multiple pieces at the same time? And I'm like, no, I would just because I watch so many people on social media, right? And that's one of the things that's great about social media is that the world is out there for you to find, right? And so while I'm, scrolling, at least I'm scrolling through artistic things for the most part, although, you still send your sister the silly memes. But there's so much art that's out there. And I follow hundreds and hundreds of artists just because I want to see what people are doing. And I watch some folks, they're painting on, 3, 4, 5 pieces at a time. And you're like, I can't even remotely think about that. I don't know why. Although when I finish one piece, I think to myself, oh, I'm going to do another piece very similar so that it will become a series, right? So it's going to be the same size. It's going to be circular. It's going to have a certain sort of aesthetic in terms of shape, radial or organic, and it'll be like a different colorway, right? But so this one is pinks, this one might be blues, and this one might be greens, but I can sort of, in my mind, create a series. So that in some regards is strategic. But again, it's sort of driven by whatever happened in the first one.
Yeah, I was just remembering all your work in the show that I went to when I met you. It's impressive when it's all together.
I know, like when I was getting ready for that show, it really was the first time where I was like, I have 40 pieces here, and I'm looking at, 15 or 20 at a time on sort of the floor, trying to decide how I'm going to, mount and display the artwork on the wall. So that really was the first sort of official, like big, let's put it all up on the wall at the same time. And like collectively, I was like, wow, I've done a lot, which is pretty cool in a short amount of time. So I think a lot of people were surprised to be like at the show just to sort of know that I hadn't been doing this for, 10, 12, 15 years. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you've been collecting.
I've been collecting for many, many years.
Can you walk us through well, you kind of have already, but can you walk us through your creative process from idea to finished piece?
So, beyond the sort of collecting and the sorting and the cleaning and washing and organizing, like when I start to work on a piece, it's usually driven by color. So I have to choose, like what I tend to do now is I will at least prep a lot of the background color boards, right? The hardboard that's painted in my color palette. And so I'll typically start with one of those colors, one of those size pieces, and then sort of go over to my shelves of collections and think to myself, okay, I'm going to start with, this size board probably means that I'm not going to be grabbing the giant pieces of driftwood, right? I'm going to size the pieces that I want. So I then sort of tend to collect around myself on the bench a mixture of things that I think I might want to integrate. And sometimes, by the time the process is over, I've got like just bins stacked on top of each other because I've gone back for more and more and more to I don't know, bring interest to it, or I needed a little something extra, or I can't find what I'm looking for in terms of objects. And then sometimes I'll do a piece that is strictly shells and seaweed. And sometimes I'll do a piece that has a lot of like the more unusual objects in there, whether it's, teeth from a fish, or, pine cones, or parts of a fishing reel or fishing lures, or parts from lobster traps, some of the more man-made items. And so I let that sort of guide, like this one's going to be more sort of, I don't know, soothing, and this one's going to be a little bit more rustic. And what color driftwood do I want to integrate? Is it got a lot of rust in it? And if I'm going to work with rusty, what colors work with rust, right? So you make some of those conscious decisions along the way. And sometimes, like I said, it turns out to be what I had intended, and sometimes it just ends up being very different. But after after I sort of work with everything and I've finalized the piece in the flat lay, you then have to meticulously take every single piece back off and glue it. And so that part of me is my graphic design skill, right? Because people have said to me, I can't even see a speck of glue. And I'm like, good, because that's what I don't want to see the glue. I just want it to just blend together. So every individual piece is glued very carefully, and then it sort of sits and dries, and then, I choose how I'm going to frame it. And I did start out with a lot of glass, but I find that, I don't know, I like the ability to get up close and not have a reflection, and sort of investigate without that sort of layer of interference, and glare, and I just prefer it to be exposed. Some people are afraid that it's going to be damaged, but I think like once it gets past the traveling, and it hangs on your wall, what's going to happen to it? A little dust now and then, but so doesn't everything else. Yeah. So that's kind of the process. And yeah, it's exciting, I think, to just keep pushing and doing new things and just learning from my experiences, right? And I think that that's part of what I would say to any artist, to be like, just do it. Don't hold back. For years as a designer, I have a ton of artistic friends, and a lot of them are fine artists, and they would always sort of try to encourage me, like, you should come down to the art cafe and work with us on Wednesdays. And I'm like, I wouldn't know what I'm doing. Like, I don't have my thing yet. And when I sort of finally found this, so many of those people said to me, you found your thing, like you've gravitated onto something that is working for you. Other people are really, interested in it. And like, that's just a good feeling. So.
How do you combine the art you love to make and the art you sell?
Well, I think I'm lucky that I live where I live, right? And so that's obviously the inspiration. And I also feel like other people who live on the coast, whether it's the coast of Florida or, the coast of someplace in Europe or here in Rhode Island, I think we all appreciate the ocean and the shoreline or the rivers or the lakes or things of that nature. And so like that's really the inspiration. So I think a lot of people automatically gravitate toward the art, if they like the outdoors and they like nature. And I have to sort of step back and say, my art isn't going to be for everyone, but it's for me. And I like what I do, and I like what I'm making. And when I finish a piece, like, it makes me happy. So if it's not somebody else's thing, that's fine. I think scale is probably one of the biggest challenges. Like, I would love to produce some really large pieces, but I'm sort of still struggling with finding the right audience for that. I think it's easier for people to invest in small pieces, right? So that's the business side of art, which is a little hard for me. I mean, I get it. People, it's a financial commitment, but I've always been an art collector and a patron of the arts. And if I have my choice of what I'm going to spend my what do they call, discretionary money on, like, it's going to be art, right? I have a lot of pieces that I've collected over the years, and to me, it's worthwhile. And so, like, I would love to find more people like that. And I think just getting out there and doing shows and meeting people who have the same level of enthusiasm, like, that encourages me to just keep doing it, right? But I do think scale is probably one of the biggest challenges. And also thinking it's okay to do something that's a little off, a little weird, a little crazy, a little like, maybe I'll put the dentures in some piece someday, right? I don't know. I have a whole collection of shotgun shells, the plastic ones that you find, like, you wouldn't you just wouldn't have any idea how many of them are all over the beaches and where they're coming from and how they're getting there. But I pick them up when I see them. And I think someday I'm gonna do something with those. It's just not the right time yet. So as I get more daring, like, you know, I'll do more things that are just a little bit different. We'll see where it takes me.
I love it. How do people find your art to purchase? Do you have a website or social media?
So I have a website, a new website. It's nadineflowers.com. I just thought it would be easy to keep the name there. And I also have an Instagram account as well. And that is the same. So, you know, my Instagram account started off as just sort of photography because I've always, you know, graphic design and photography has always been a part of what I've done. And it used to be more associated with that, but then like there was a big shift along the way. So now it's primarily, you know, outdoors environment, like, you know, nature still. I think I posted a picture of a baby snake that I found like 2 days ago, like, because it's still nature, right? And but yeah, a lot of it is what I use, you know, use to show my work these days.
We'll put that information in the show notes.
Yeah.
Can you share a recent project or a piece of work that you're particularly happy about?
So one of the things that I've started to explore a little bit more is sort of connecting pieces of natural objects with wire and sinew and drilling and binding and combining similar, like some of that is happening in the piece behind me here. And so I find that that's pretty interesting, and I got a lot of positive feedback. There's one particular piece that I had done, I think a couple pieces before this one, and it has a very indigenous, Native American feel to it. It includes, you know, reclaimed sailcloth. So I'm starting to integrate other materials in as well. So for backgrounds, besides just the painted colored board, I've done some pieces with some reclaimed burlap, which I think is pretty interesting, and the sailcloth. And then just trying to figure out other ways to join things. And that's kind of where my brain is heading in terms of maybe how to take things sculptural as well. Making things deeper off of the canvas or the, you know, the face of the artwork, which is also another reason to not do glass, right? So the glass restricts you to a certain depth. And now I've got some pieces, although it makes them harder to transport, there are pieces that after you sort of finish the assemblage, they stick out further than the frame, which I think is spatially pretty interesting. So that's what I would like to also sort of explore and do more of, is have things be more three-dimensional and sort of break out of the space more.
I love that. How do you stay motivated as an artist?
Oh, wow. So what I've come to learn really quickly, and I don't know why this was a surprise to me, is that there's so much more to being an artist, not a graphic designer, even though that's still an artist of sort, but being an artist beyond just sort of making the art. If you want to sort of turn it into something that sort of starts to take on a life of its own, there's a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of process stuff. There's a lot of keeping track of things, you know, all the things that are not the going out on the beach and collecting and making the compositions. But I think that some of those other things allow your brain to sort of take a break or force you out of the studio. And that gives you some space to sort of step back. Because if you spend every day, I don't know for me, but if I spent every day head down, you know, making collages, it would start to feel very mechanical. So that's why sort of breaking it up with the beachcombing and the cleaning and the sorting and the organizing and the shows and you know, the paperwork and the keeping track of things, like it forces you to sort of stop and take things in different chunks, right? So I've got a couple of upcoming shows in July and August going to be here at the house. Like that is making me think about, you know, how to display my work. And again, like preparing for that takes time and it takes me out of the studio making things, but I think that's good. You know, I don't know if I would want to be sort of doing it, you know, every day straight, because then it just feels less enjoyable and less creative. I do that already for my, you know, graphic design. Like that's what I've done for 30 years. And I'm fortunate that I still do love that, you know, working for myself has been great. You know, I worked for other people for, you know, 15 or more years, and the freedom of having your own business has sort of allowed me to even sort of splinter off and start this other creative endeavor. So I don't think there's ever any lack of motivation. Like I'm always wanting to do more, and like I don't sit still. I don't know the last time I turned a TV on to sit still. You know, it just doesn't happen. So I'm always doing something.
Are there any other artists or creatives who have influenced or inspired your work?
I think artists that gravitate towards nature, right? So like Goldsworthy is a really prime example, and his work is amazing where he does ephemeral art, right, where it doesn't last forever. And I think that that is an interesting approach. And in some ways, I'm sure that the pieces that I make won't last forever either. You know, they're natural objects in time, seaweed or feathers, you know, they're going to, I don't know how long it'll take, but they won't be there either. But I think he's a great inspiration, and people who, so many people I think use nature as inspiration for their art, but I actually use nature as my art, which is maybe a bit of a different twist on it, like he did. And then I think, you know, some of the core artists that you learn about in college, like, you know, Ansel Adams as a black and white photographer, you know, like he's just so amazing, you know, the ability that he had to see in, you know, we all look at the same thing, but what he did with it was amazing. And Georgia O'Keeffe, another, you know, amazing person who just took from nature to create her paintings. So pretty impressive.
Agree. What advice would you give to an aspiring artist looking to pursue a career in the arts?
I would say, first of all, do it, right? Don't be afraid. Don't wait for the perfect time, because, you know, that's probably one of my mistakes, was that I kept sort of waiting for something to interest me or trigger me, or to find something to sort of latch onto. And what I have found is that what I was doing a year and a half ago may not be of interest to me anymore because I've moved on to something different. And or maybe it is, but the you can't wait for the perfect time, right? You just, if you have that sort of desire to make something and to be creative, like you just need to do it, and you need to do it for yourself, versus trying to please somebody else, because there's, you know, not everybody's going to like what you're doing, and that's okay. But I also, when I see young artists who are sort of being brave and bold, like I love to encourage them to do that, you know, however that is, whether it's just giving them, you know, constructive, positive feedback, whether it's encouraging them to enter something into a show, or to attend a lecture, or go see an art exhibit. Like you just need to sort of dive in and expose yourself to as much as you can, as often as you can, right? Because that's where the ideas come from, you know, is just to look at things around you, and to look at them from a different perspective, you know, your perspective, because that's what's important to you. So yeah.
Great. What is your favorite book, movie, song, podcast?
Oh boy, book, movie, song, podcast. I am an avid reader, and mostly historical fiction. And I read on a Kindle, which is a bit challenging just because you never get to see the cover and the author. So I oftentimes like read back to back to back to back books. And sometimes I'm like, I don't even know what I'm reading. I don't know what the name of it is. I bought it. It's like I'm just moving through it. But I do love to read. Some of my favorite books that I would probably recommend, like if you're sort of sitting around a dinner table talking with your friends about books that left an impression, I would probably say The Invention of Wings by Sue Monk Kidd. And certainly, although it's wildly popular, Where the Crawdads Sing. I think her name is Delia Owens. And what's interesting to me about that book, and they made it into a movie, which is always kind of a bummer. But there's the main character, and there's drama, and there's, murder, and there's all this other stuff. But what to me was the most inspiring about that book was the way the main character was in love with nature, right? She was just, it was so integral to who she was as a person. And then the way that the author wrote about it and just weaved it into the story as just a critical element, nature, being ever present and always around you, and such a huge part of this young girl's life. Like, that's what resonated with me. What other pieces? Like when I was younger, really, really young, S.E. Hinton's The Outsiders, right? Seminal novel, right? It was just perfect as a kid, as a young teenager. Memoirs of a Geisha, I thought was really an impressively written book. Again, like maybe that was probably the beginning of my gravitation to historical fiction. But I do love to read about different cultures and different worlds. I'm reading a book right now. It's like Afghanistan culture. And I listen to a lot of audiobooks as well. Sometimes when I'm working, sometimes I need to sort of cut back on the music. And sometimes I need to have the music, but I'll listen to a lot of audiobooks as well. But those are some books and audiobooks. Movies. I'm not a big movie watcher, TV watcher, movie watcher. I would say, like, back in the day when we still had TVs, if the Shawshank Redemption was on and playing, I would stop and sit down and watch it. Probably because he was out there to play the long game in terms of like his whole process of sort of getting out of prison. And like I just thought it was such an interesting storyline, and you really got the characters were really well developed. So that's probably one of my favorite movies, I guess. And podcasts. I'm not a big podcast listener. Oh, I listen to The Moth. NPR's Moth, or I guess it's NPR. There was a phase there where I just listened to back to back episodes of The Moth, like when I was walking or running, for sure. But again, it's sort of like every story was really different. Sometimes they made you laugh, sometimes they made you cry, sometimes they were, just really interesting stories. And the other person speak of podcasts or news that I listen to is Shankar Verdantan, and he has a podcast, I guess you'd call it, called The Hidden Brain, and it's just such logical stuff that he talks about, but he explains how and why the brain works and thinks, which I find fascinating. So whenever that's on, like if I'm in the car and I'm listening to the radio, I will listen to that. He's on GBH, and so that's where I usually pick him up. What else? I don't know. I think that music. It's all over the map, I would say. But I would probably say I listen to a lot of the Avett Brothers. I listen to a lot of softer music. I do listen to like 70s yacht rock music, but I also listen to a lot of I like to go to the folk festival in Newport every summer, and that's a really great experience because you buy your tickets, you don't know who's going to be there, but leading up to the concert, they announce the artists on Instagram, and so I've created a playlist. I just add all of the artists that I'm going to see. And it exposes me to a whole series of people that I don't really know. But at the end of the session, the folk festival, like I've found half a dozen new artists that I'll add to my playlist regularly. But I love Tom Petty. I do listen to country music, and a lot of that is sort of more of the older vintage country music. We went to Nashville a couple of years ago, which was great fun, like historically, and also just sort of the music and the history of the music, when it was sort of first being born in America, you know, and the real roots of country, which is pretty interesting. So, but it is kind of all over the map. Yeah.
Is there a book that you recommend over and over again that you love?
Oh gosh. I would probably say Where the Crawdads Sing is probably one of my favorites. And I know it's, like I said, it's so wildly popular. But I think it's really, really well written. Yeah.
What do you want to talk about that I didn't ask?
Oh boy, I feel like we've covered a lot of topics. I don't know. I guess I would say, like, as an artist, whether it's graphic design or fine art, I was really fortunate to study with professors who really cared about art in in college, and also in my first design career job. I worked at a design studio, Malcolm Greer Designers in Providence, and he was an amazing designer, an amazing creative person, and for him, like, it was so important to get it right that everything else was secondary. And like that, I think, was key to sort of my philosophy of like design, and it's not just good enough, like it has to be like dead on, you know? And I think that some of that has sort of translated to the more strategic sort of structural process of my art, I guess. But he was just a great inspiration, and all the folks that worked there in the studio at the time. So I was fortunate to have that experience. And some of my professors in school, Dietmar Winkler, you know, as a young student, having him for inspiration as a teacher. He was German, but like I'll say like Swiss German trained, and Mark Whistler, who also came out of the Basel School of Design, were really great. And Alma Davenport in photography. I was fortunate to have some really great teachers in that regard. So yeah.
Thank you so much for talking with us today.
Yeah, I hope you found it interesting, and
Yeah,
yeah,
fascinating.
more good stuff.
Yeah, thanks for letting us into your home. I mean, it's gorgeous.
Thank you.
I felt inspired for sure.
Good.
Thank you.
I appreciate your time, and yeah, I think it's great.
Yay, much love, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.